Teachers, what's the darkest thing you've seen from a student? Our school had a selective mute kid that graduated last year. Kids were calling him Fish Boy. It turns out he was buying fish and killing them in various ways on Instagram based on people's requests in the comments. And #X200B. Edit. Was not expecting to be the top comment and didn't realize I haven't been on Reddit in 3 days. He was not a student of mine, so I can't really elaborate. All I remember is the school found out because he brought a fish to school. And #X200B. Edit again. I teach middle school and I'm surprised how much selective mutism is a thing. We have 3 selective mutes this year. In elementary school we had a kid with a severe peanut allergy and a teacher caught some kids rubbing peanut butter on the opening of his water bottle. We also had a kid who could describe in detail about how to prepare heroin. Kid seemed down and I asked him to please tell me what was wrong. Not today, but when you're ready. I was his last class of the day and he promised he would. End of the year comes and he told me his brother killed himself. He said he thought about the same many times but always remembered that he had made me a promise. I made him promise to call me if he ever thought he might again, and he promised me again. He's doing amazingly well and is about to graduate from college. I'm a teacher. A student saw one of my former co-teachers at some point with his wife and thought she was hot. And my co-teacher took advantage of this to get the student to secretly record his sister taking showers and shit. He offered videos of his wife performing sexual acts with him to the student in exchange. He finally got caught when the student blackmailed the teacher into trying to get the wife to fuck him. And when he proposed it to his wife, she called the cops. I taught welding and metal sculpture at the high school level for a year. One morning, one of my students, a quiet, awkward, but really nice young man, came into class and asked me for a Band-Aid. I asked him what for and he replied that it was for a burn. Class hadn't started yet for the day. He showed me and it was a fresh second-degree burn that was already blistering. It was in the shape of an A. Some kids, if I'm going to be honest, they were bottom performers and troublemakers, from a different class of mine had swiped a small metal letter, A, from one of my supply bins. He did it with a lighter. And then branded this kid on the morning school bus. He had let the kids do it because he really wanted to fit in. He didn't have many friends and these kids had seemed cool because they were always acting out. As a mandatory reporter, I reported it. The police got involved. Other than that I have no idea what else happened. There was kid in my wife's class that squeezed the classroom hamster to death. I had a kid who really wanted his parents to come to his graduation ceremony. But they were both sex offenders and couldn't be on campus. He just wanted someone there to support him. I am an English teacher and I am the sponsor of the school's comic book and anime club. This year, I managed to take my club to a convention. And many of them had several firsts. Such as meeting celebrities, LARPing, participating in panels, speaking to professional artists, and just being with a larger fandom community. Upon our return, one of my members, a 16-year-old girl, asked to speak to me privately. She proceeded to tell me that she had been molested by her father and uncle ever since she was 12. On her 16th birthday, she finally had enough of the abuse and she contacted the police and told them everything. Before the investigation could begin, her uncle committed suicide out of shame. Her father was about to do the same. But she was able to convince him not to do it. He is now facing trial for his crimes. She then thanked me, and said that the 2 days we spent at the convention were the happiest days of her life. And it allowed her to feel like a child for the first time in 4 years. It was the proudest moment of my career. Edit. I want to express a heartfelt thank you for the overwhelmingly positive response to this post. Your kind words will serve to keep me fueled during this time of social distancing. I really miss my students. And I hope I can see them once again before the school year ends. As for the subject of my post, please know that her counselors and I are closely monitoring her as the wheels of justice slowly turn. As long as she's my student, I'll do everything in my power to keep her safe. And maintaining the supportive environment of the comic book and anime club for her to socialize and thrive within and enjoy her high school experience is the best way I can help her now. A list simply entitled The List with a few students' names and my co-teacher's name on it. Was a student with some serious behavioral disabilities on it who admitted it was a kill list. Edit. Rip my inbox. Lots of people on here who experienced something similar. No, this was not recent. The student received appropriate support after this incident. I've got two. I had a student casually tell me about how he pulled the eyes out of his rabbit's head. He explained how there was blood everywhere. This was my first day working as a supply teacher at that school, and my first conversation with the student. I later brought it up to support staff and they were shocked he mentioned it to me. Apparently he killed his rabbit because his mom loved it more than she loved him. The boy was now in foster care, as his mother was a drug addict. He shared a lot of really dark stuff with me that day. Another one, more sad than dark, was at a different school. Students had to write their address for an assignment, but this 4th grade girl didn't know hers. Another student asked me, "Do you know where the so-and-so motel is? She lives there." Really broke my heart, as this girl was so young and innocent, and didn't really understand how unfortunate her living situation was, as she proudly Googled the motel and found her address. Really low-income part of town. A former student of mine was always the quiet one in class. Taught them for 4 years and I spent a large amount of time trying to get them to open up and contribute to class, as their written work was exceptional. 7 years after graduation they emailed to apologize for being quiet and that they didn't want me to think they were stuck up. They were being frequently raped by a family member the whole time and were too afraid to speak out. Absolutely broke me. I teach an algebra class and I was explaining how, in our city at least, your address tells you how far you are from the central streets, like a Cartesian coordinate system. A girl, who happens to be my daughter's friend, volunteered to let me graph her address. 3 months later a boy got expelled for threatening to shoot up the school. He had her address and written threats to kidnap her from her house. He got the address from that class. Answering questions from Thread. I do not blame myself for the actions of crazy people. He could have found info several other ways. I put my address up first and my daughter's friend wanted to use hers so that they could know the distance between their houses, was the point of the exercise. Kid has 0% chance of kidnapping her. I know her family well. I teach teens with emotional, behavioral disorders as their primary disability and learning as a secondary. Anyways, seen lots of shit, but I'll narrow down to these two. First, one student D was hard to connect with. He was so disconnected from his peers even. He was on the smaller side and lacked confidence. D was the head-down disengaged type that usually took a little longer to build a trusting relationship with. I just assumed this was his coping mechanism at school. One day he was gone and another student announced that it was for molesting his little sisters. It turned out there was a big bust in our area within his trailer park where children were just being passed around between convicted sex offenders and used to create porn. The reason truth unfolded was because his little sister's teacher noticed that she had bled through her clothing in her 1st grade class. His little sister admitted that he had been abusing her for longer than she can remember. The most upsetting detail I remember is that his mother was allowing it to happen in exchange for childcare and money. He ended up in a juvenile detention center before his court date. Because he had an IEP. I was still responsible for providing instruction to him. What that meant was I would send a packet of math worksheets to his tutor at the center. Every couple weeks they would get sent back to me for grading. The first time I received his work there was doodles and symbols. The next time, he started to write phrases. By the end of the semester, he wrote me pleas to help him all over his pages. Later on I found out he was being victimized simultaneously by an older man he met on the bus. D is now married and has a child of his own. Second, I had a brother and sister, K+M, in class together who had a unique bond. They had not spent most of their years growing up together as they were in and out of foster cares or group homes. At this point in time, they were living with an aunt, but it mostly seemed like they were house hopping between family members. Their attendance was poor and it was hard to keep track of their current residence. It wasn't very unusual in this district because there's a lot of mobility, especially around this population. Halfway through the year we got a new female student, J. Her mother had gone to prison, so she moved to the area to live with family members. J made a positive first impression with peers despite being quiet and more reserved. She had anxiety and depression, so when she stopped attending after the first week no one seemed alarmed. It was such a big life change, so most teachers presumed she bailed on school. It was at this time K+M were thriving at school. They were seeming more positive and taking better care of themselves. Come to find out, they invited Jay over one weekend and decided to beat and drug her in an apartment where they had been staying unsupervised. They kept her high in a closet and prostituted her for income. That then explained why they were wearing new clothes and fresh haircuts. Not a teacher, but I did do a lot of volunteer work with little kids. One of the 5th grade boys was caught grabbing random girls and trying to pull them into the supply closet and try to kiss them. He was even caught trying to grab their butts or would out his hand on their seat as they started to sit down. When we finally got to talk to his parents, turned out his grandpa was teaching him these things. The weirdest part was when we questioned the grandpa about it, his response was, "Who cares? They're just little girls." I was teaching in a tiny community. 13-year-olds. This kid's uncle, also a teacher, pulled her aside and she started bawling. Says her teenage brother died in a skidoo accident. We find out a week later that he was basically almost murdered and left for dead by a gang of teenagers and bled to death. That place was all sorts of messed up. She turned out okay. Edit. I'm not sure if mortally wounding was right. Kid could probably have recovered if he had medical attention. It gets to like -40°C where I was. That's also -40 in freedom units. If you call a ski-doo a snowmobile, you lose your cred in northern Canada. I thought about adding a disambiguation but decided against it. I stopped teaching after that school year. Therapy helps. My first year teaching was, like everyone says, the worst year. The first day of school I'm getting to know the kids by asking them random questions, and I ask this one boy what he wants to be when he grows up and he replies with, "Doesn't matter, I'm going to end up in prison like my parents." Woo-ah, okay. From there things got progressively worse. He was hearing voices and always threatening to hurt other staff or students. He was hitting his head on walls or windows when frustrated. He came back from spring break and told me the voices told him to kill a cat he found. By the end of the year he was sexually assaulting girls at school. Saw a couple of kids walking down the hallway. One ends up behind another. For no reason at all punches him in the head as hard as he can. I immediately call him over and ask why the crap he did it. He immediately acts like he has no idea what I'm talking about. If I hadn't seen him do it, I'd probably have believed it. He was so convincing. I remind him there are cameras and then he admits he did it just because he wanted to. No remorse. No reason. No regret. I had multiple other incidents like that with him through the year. I worked in a low-income high-need school then and tried my best not to judge my students, but it was weird to honestly believe this 14-year-old was going to seriously injure or kill someone one day. I actually had a year where kids were doing personal narratives and sharing them with the class. They knew in advance of choosing their story that they'd be sharing with the class. One kid told the story of her dad killing her mom and then himself, which she woke up to on Christmas morning. Another talked about defending her brother in court for beating her dad within an inch of his life when he found out dad was sexually abusing her. The next told about fleeing the cartels after his dad killed one of them to protect him and seeking asylum in America. Let me tell you, kids have seen some shit. As a light at the end of the tunnel. After like 5 of these kinds of stories in a row, I asked if anyone had a happy story to break all the sadness. This bright-eyed kid popped right up and told about his dog having puppies and offering them to the traumatized kids. My grandfather was a band director. I was taking a trumpet lesson with him after school, when another teacher walked in and handed my grandfather a suicide note he found from a student I didn't really know. My grandfather left and I went home. And after talking to him later, he talked with the student and the counselor and eventually they got him the help he needed. When we were 12, a classmate of mine was obsessed with another girl. He would brag about his plan to drag her into the boys' bathroom and rape her. As kids, we didn't know what that truly meant or what to do about it. I remember talking about it at recess. Teachers eventually got involved. And nothing ever happened. Thank God. Darkest thing. I was an intervention specialist. Had a student who was a mysterious pooper. For a while he would poop on the floor in the bathroom and no one knew who was doing it. A student of mine was a constant troublemaker and wannabe thug. During a football game, he broke his arm and had it placed in a plaster cast. A few days later, he got into an argument with another student. At the end of the day, wannabe thug jumped the other kid and started pummeling his face with the cast. Wannabe was arrested and the other kid was hospitalized for almost a week with massive facial injuries, 2 black eyes, a broken nose, multiple lost teeth, and multiple cuts to his face from the beating. Edit, update. Most comments are stating the obvious. He doesn't sound like a wannabe thug based in this account. Rest assured. Until he went beast mode. He was a wannabe. His status obviously improved after this and after his time in juvie. But once his arm healed and his weapon was removed, his status quickly diminished as his buddies realized he was a one-hit wonder. There's so many things to say here from a middle school teacher. Here are a few. A video started circulating of one of my students curb stomping a cat. Then a few weeks later, the same student was spreading rumors that they were planning to shoot up the school on the last day. This quickly was taken over by the local police and investigated. I've unfortunately seen way too many students suffer from the after effects of all types of abuse, which is truly heartbreaking. Then there is the classic kid that likes to bring weird toys to school like Barbie doll heads and just play with them as if they are the only one in the room. He would also bring water in vodka bottles and honestly think nothing was wrong with it. Saw a kid try to jump off the balcony. School is 2 stories. Same kid also put their hands aggressively on another teacher. I think the scariest thing is just realizing that there is a chance that you are witnessing the childhood years of a serial killer. One of my teacher friends told me about a student that had super troubled, abusive childhood, had a history of torturing animals, and he would make comments to female students about how much he liked their skin, in a beyond creepy way. I remember when I was younger I saw a swastika for the first time and thought it looked cool. Started drawing it all over my desks when I was bored because I liked the shape. Got older and learned what the symbol meant. I can't imagine what all my teachers were thinking about that dumpy, unkempt, social awkward white guy in the back corner of the room. Not my student. He's from the class next door when I was student teaching. This child had a confusing home life. Apparently he was adopted by a family member, but it's unclear what happened to his biological parents. Anyway, he goes through these intense mood swings. Multiple times throughout the year he would pull the fire alarm and made a break for the school's parking lot at one moment, and then deeply apologetic another moment, as if he wasn't in control of himself just an hour ago. During his outbursts he would occasionally attempt to enter a room, and when he found that he couldn't, he would bang the door and scream at the top of his lungs as if it's a zombie movie. And yes, this is all while instruction is happening. He would literally escape the classroom in the middle of a lesson. He has caused lockdowns. As it turns out, this child is suicidal, and his actions might or might not be self-harming in a sense, since he knows these behaviors would earn him a punishment. Apparently, at home, he's been reported to jump out of a moving car. Later in the year he also told his teacher and para that he wants to die. His class was awesome though. His teacher had the whole class write a note to the kid, and they all wrote such sweet encouraging notes. The teacher then made a collage and gave it to him as a gift. After his outburst episodes, when he comes back apologizing, the whole class would give him a group hug. At one point all his teachers talked to him after one of his episodes, basically saying how they have such high expectations for him, how far he has come and how much further he will go. My mentor teacher attended this talk. She cried after. I imagine I would too. Sometimes there is a comical side to this situation, though. One day as I was teaching science, I saw the principal chasing this kid down the road through the window, somehow wielding a long stick as if he's about to shepherd him back to his pen. And I had to just keep teaching and act like I didn't see anything. It was a rough student teaching year. I had stories in my room too, but damn did I learn a lot. My mom was a school nurse and always came home with some crazy stories. One of the most blood-curdling things she has was a girl that was really into cutting to the point where she had a scar that covered the majority of the outside of her bicep. The girl one day decided that she hated her scar and wanted to get rid of it. At home, by herself, she decided she was going to get rid of them. In her bathroom, she took a knife to her arm, cutting a 4 inches by 6 inches piece of scar tissue that was just under an inch thick out of her arm. She then proceeded to stitch it up using a needle and thread and bandage it with gauze all by herself. She then woke up and went to school the next day so she could go to my mom's office and ask if it looked infected. It was. I was a substitute for a while several years ago. I did the special education classes mostly. Everything from kids who simply had a learning disability to students with severe disabilities such as ASD and behavioral issues. One kid had a very low IQ and suffered from ADHD. He would come in every day an absolute mess. He was beyond violent and had zero control over his emotions. It's common to see those sorts of issues in some of these kiddos. But we didn't understand why it was this bad. He had medication prescribed and on file to help with some of his issues. Well, come to find out, Mom had been keeping his medication to do only God knows what with. He wasn't getting anything to help with these very real problems. Eventually this kid lost his shit on the teacher's aide in the class and the school had to expel him. One class 1 was in a lot had mostly kids with ADHD, dyslexia, mild behavioral issues, and I really connected with them. It was a challenge. But I loved them. There was a boy, maybe 10 years old, who would talk to me quite a bit about his father who was in a local rehab program for meth abuse. It was a religious thing that kept people on a campus and had them do church stuff, labor, and volunteer work. Anyway, he would give me updates every few weeks. At the end of the year he comes up and says, "Guess what, Ms. Phoenix_0113? I think my dad is gonna come home. He says he's not gonna do drugs anymore and he's done at rehab. I can't wait for him to come home." He went on about how they were gonna do father-son type things. It was heartbreaking to watch a child deal with a parent in rehab for meth. He was so hopeful and there was a deep love there. I hope sincerely. Every time I think of that sweet kid. His dad is healthy and present for his son. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.